Hey, Heart of the City, welcome to another week in quarantine, what we're learning in quarantine, what God's talking to us about in quarantine. The first thing I know he's talking to me about is spring is in the air. It's been so good to get out. It's warmer. Chair and I have been putting on the rubber boots and splashing around in puddles, and that just feels really good. So things are starting to feel like they're looking up and breaking free, and we're so excited to get back together with you in the house at some point. We don't know really when that's going to be, but our hearts are starting to really reach out and connect, I think, and in ways, it's the heart grows so much fonder when you're in these situations, and so we just miss you and we love you, and along the way, as I'm preaching today, let's do some chat, like get in the chat, Also, if you're on Facebook today, we would love for you to go ahead and go over to our website, because at the end of the service, we're going to put a link in the Zoom room chat, or we're going to put a link in the chat box for you to get prayer today after the service. So we just want to invite you to do that. So if you've never been on our website, it's just heartofthecityak.com. Go there, go live. You'll see it up in the toolbar where you can go to the live view, and you can go over there now. Some of you are already on there, but yeah, we just want to see the comments. And if you're here on Facebook Live, you can stay here too. But please blow us up a little bit, put some comments in there. We want to try to interact with you guys and kind of see who's here and hear from you. But today I have been really thinking about quarantine and the ramifications of quarantine. I mean, who cannot think about this, right? And so what I want to start with is just a question. I want to start with this idea, this question, and this may be too much information. I mean, it may be a little too vulnerable, but has anybody out there dealt with just feeling extremely lazy in quarantine? Come on, somebody put it in the chat box. Can I get an amen? I mean, you don't have to admit it, but it's just so weird how, like, when you're sitting around in a house, you would think you'd have a ton of energy. And sometimes I feel like I have a little bits of energy and stuff, but this whole quarantine thing has really gotten me thinking about this phenomena of laziness. And here's the way I understand laziness. I think some of you already know how I get to understand this, but laziness is simple. It's like this: if you have a need, and if you have an opportunity, and you have an ability, and you don't do it, that's just lazy, right? A need, an opportunity, and an ability. You have to have all three. Like if you just have a need and an opportunity, but you don't have the ability, it's not lazy, you're just incompetent, right? Or if you have like an opportunity and you have the ability, but no one really needs it, it's like, why would you even bother? If you have a need and you have an ability, but there's no opportunity and you're never catching a break, then that's not lazy. That's just a matter of opportunity, right? It's a matter of, of being in the right place at the right time. So, but laziness is a need, an opportunity, and actually a competency or an ability. And so as I was thinking this through, I'm thinking, you know what, maybe one of the biggest threats coming out of this whole quarantine thing isn't necessarily an economic threat, right? I mean, that's going to be a big deal. And, maybe it's not like a spiritual threat like this, like what's the church going to do and all these kinds of things. I think maybe one of the biggest threats is that through our inactivity, we actually begin to get stuck in some really bad habits. And so I don't know how long we've been in quarantine. I think we've been in quarantine for, I don't know, let's just call it 2 years. But basically quarantine, like they say that I read one website that was saying anywhere between 15 and 200 days, you can form a habit. I'm like, 15 to 200 days? Okay, you're basically saying nothing. But the idea is, I've heard a lot, 66 days and you form a habit, whether that's good or bad. And I know that, we're going to be in this thing for 66 days. It feels like, I think this is our 5th week or something. But what happens is that I love this. God's genius in sending us off to work every day, whether we like our job or not, his genius in sending us off to work every day is that it exercises our muscle for self-denial, right? And it actually increases our threshold for self-discipline. And as our self-denial and our self-discipline atrophy through inactivity, our ability to deny ourselves in other areas actually gets harder. So it's like inactivity doesn't perpetuate like lots of energy to go do stuff. Inactivity actually can perpetuate inactivity. So our self-discipline to move toward those good things that takes self-denial just kind of gets harder and harder, right? It's like, honestly, like, it's like, why have I been sitting in this chair for like so long and I need to get up and ride my bike, but for whatever reason, I'm just not doing it. Like, that's just lazy, dude. Like, you need to get up and ride your bike, and you have the bike right there, and you have the ability and you have the opportunity. I mean, just get up and do it. You know what I mean? And I mean, I can sit there and say that to myself all day long, but I think there's some deeper sort of things that are in play that keep us in these ruts. Okay. And what I want to do today, because I've been so intrigued with this phenomenon of laziness, and it's a very big concern of mine. Like, it's one of the threats that'll keep us in quarantine, even when the quarantine's lifted. Like, it'll keep us inactive and sort of like sunken if we don't actually explore this a little bit and kind of talk about like what are those things that are going to keep us in laziness cycles. And so I've just put 3 big things together that actually are cyclical, that'll keep us sort of down in a lazy cycle or a hard rut to sort of get out of, right? And we don't want to create bad habits in quarantine, right? And we want an awareness to be like, okay, wait, what do we got to do here in order that, you know, we don't like create really bad things and bad habits. And so I got some of this stuff from a guy named Paul Maxwell, but some of it is just, you know, I'm always rearranging, and there's so many other influences in my life, but I want to make sure I give him credit because he's a good writer. But I think that there's at least 3 big vicious cycles. There's more than that, but 3 that are really close to home for me and maybe for you. And these are things that will perpetuate human inactivity, right? And each of these highlights sort of a different logic behind our tendency towards laziness or complacency or not getting ourselves up and doing some stuff. And the first cycle that I want to address is this inefficient, sort of incompetent cycle. And I think that it works like this. It works like this. You have an incompetence, right? And you walk into something that you need to actually work on. And so you put out effort, right? And you end up failing because you don't have the competency to actually pull it off, which leads to this sort of frustration, which leads to this inactivity, which leads to more incompetence because you're just not learning. You're not actually getting the tools that you actually need to sort of get out of this incompetence cycle, right? And so what happens, I think, is we continue. The craziest part is like we continue in these incompetent cycles thinking that something is going to be different. And so here's the idea is, you know, I have become so competent, so much more competent in this whole language of online and how people are relating and like all of these microphones and all of this switcher and these cameras. I got 3 cameras in here, lights and everything. And I know, like, I mean, my competency has grown so much because I was in this moment where a need, I have to do this. I have the opportunity, and I have to get the competency in order to do it. And if not, then I'll just basically, I'll become irrelevant, or I'll actually just like the future will just sort of pass me by. And so what happens is we end up going into the future with this Jetsons sort of mentality. And here's why I'm saying that. Do you guys remember the Jetsons? I love the Jetsons. When I was a kid, it was actually written in the 60s, and then it was reintroduced in the early 80s. And so the Jetsons was this cartoon for some of you people who are young. Yeah. It was this cartoon of this that was written in 1960 of this 1960s family that was projected in the future. So they lived in the future, right? And they had these flying cars, you know, they had the robot maid, right? They had the moving sidewalks, they had like you push a button and some food would appear. We call it a vending machine now. We call the other thing an escalator. And so anyway, what happened in the Jetsons is you have this futuristic setting, but you have these ideas and values that were all 1960s, right? And so the fascinating thing, I started reading about this, and they've redone the Jetsons. And the Jetsons, like the normal day one now, is actually the housewife is no longer wearing an apron and she's like the perfect little figure and she's a submissive little wife who runs around and does everything that the kids say and that the dad says and everything. And she makes sure that, actually that the new wife is not a housewife at all. She is a wife, but Jane Jetson in the new one is now a brilliant NASA scientist who commutes back and forth through space to go to work, right? Rosie was this robot sort of slave to the white family in 1960, and now she's actually this synthetic carbon copy of the exact consciousness of George's Jetson's 124-year-old mom. Right. And they're all of the people in the 1960s cartoon were all white. There wasn't any ethnicity at all through the entire cartoon. And so now you have Elroy Jetson, who is actually has this love interest with this Asian American. And you have, many more of the people who are in all the colleagues, are people of color. And it's just so funny because what happens is, we oftentimes think that we can just keep on going with the same competencies that we have, and those things are going to be relevant in the future, and they just simply won't. And so what I'm getting at is this: what a great time right now! What a great opportunity in quarantine to actually grab some competency, to actually get some tools, gain some skills, because we have some needs. Things are actually changing. This is one of those times where you don't have to get actually stuck in a rut. You can actually, gain some competencies. You have a need. There's a need there. The world's changing, right? Communication changing. All that kind of stuff is changing, and you have the resources. I mean, you have the resources, and now you have an opportunity to actually change. And so, one of the big keys is to actually get yourself out. Get competent, get studying, there's so much to learn out there, and it's wonderful. It's actually fun. I'm figuring all this stuff out, and I'm actually having fun. I got, the headphones and all that. It's a whole new ball game, and there's a new opportunity to be creative. Anyway, I think that's an important precept. That's a very important thing to get us out of that cycle. Here's another one. Here's the second big cycle I think that we can get stuck in quarantine that'll keep us in this position of laziness and in a rut. It's the overwhelm cycle. And the overwhelm cycle goes kind of like this. This problem that we have, or whatever problem that you have, or whatever you're working on, is just way too big. It's just way too big. So what do you do when you have overwhelming problems? You're like, I don't know, man, I got to go out there and get a whole new career going. Like, oil prices are at like $19. Like, nobody's coming to, you have this literally overwhelming problem, and you have no idea even which way to start. So what do? In a cycle of laziness, you do nothing. Right? It's easier to not have to face a problem, right? It's way easier to avoid that problem than it is to just really actually start to think about it and start to face it head on. And here's the thing about the overwhelm cycle. I don't know if I have ever in my life gone, I feel super overwhelmed when I started the day and I spent all day doing absolutely nothing and I feel so much better. Like, I've never done that. And I don't think anybody has ever done that, right? And the truth is this, that obviously everybody knows this. The longer the task goes undone, the more this giant sort of massive mess or overwhelming problem and uncompleted tasks grows, right? So I think the cycle goes like this. You're overwhelmed. You're actually disorganized. Like you can't even get a leg up. Like you can't even get organized. You put out this effort, and because you're so disorganized, you don't have a system that's actually going to, be able to sustain the thing. And then so you panic and you're like, what am I going to do or whatever? And then it just leads to more inactivity. And then the inactivity adds to this growing workload because the world doesn't stop just because you did, And then it leads to even more organization because now you have more parts and pieces you got to put together and organize because they just keep being added. And so it's this really, really hard cycle to actually get yourself out of. And so here, I need to interject this right here. Here's something that I found is one of the most compelling ideas when it comes to the overwhelmingness of life. It goes like this. I think this is so absolutely vital and important. Life is kind of difficult right now, right? And I'm looking back, has there ever been a time in your life where there hasn't been like challenges? Like it's just so easy and nothing going on? I mean, maybe if you're retired and you really don't have anything to do. I mean, I know like maybe 2 or 3 of those people and they still have problems, like extended family problems and all that. And so here's what we have to understand. I love this idea that Jesus is an apocalyptic preacher. He's like, look, you're going to go through life. You're going to make all these efforts and everything like that. But you know what? It'll make some difference. But at the end of this thing, it's all going to be destroyed. And guess what? Like, I'm going to totally make a new heavens and a new earth. Like, it's all going to be paradise, but I have to actually remake it. Like, your good efforts are fantastic, but you're not the one that's going to actually save the world, like, or recreate the world. Like, I am. And so what he is saying is this. We know one thing about the future. This is so exciting to me. We know one thing about the future. And he says it in Matthew 6:34. He goes, look, here's the one thing you need to know about the future. Don't worry about it. And he goes, why? And then I ask why? Because tomorrow's going to have worry. Like, it's not going to be like perfect tomorrow. No matter how well you perform today, tomorrow's still going to have worries. He says it just like this. Don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will bring its own worries. Today's trouble is enough for today. So what he's saying is this. I think this is so fascinating. It's like the movie Lost, or excuse me, the TV series Lost. Every time those guys solved a paradox, and it was paradoxal, apocalyptic. Like, if we don't solve this right now, like bad things are going to happen, right? And so every single time in every episode, they would solve some paradox and be like, fantastic, right? And what would happen is they would realize that they've solved a paradox inside of another paradox. And so they just continue to like, oh my goodness, now we've solved this. And so this actually creates a whole nother host of problems, right? And so I think there's there's this beautiful freedom in knowing that every time you actually get like unoverwhelmed, or you've like solved like this apocalyptic problem, you have to understand that it is just within a whole nother set of paradoxical, overwhelming, big ideas that you're going to have to actually manage and overcome. And for that is such a freeing thought, because now you really do know what to expect, that the future is going to have its own set of problems and inconsistencies, and it creates a whole new paradox. And even if we get it right today. So what we want to do is say James 4, like, look at this. Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there, or, make a profit. Yet you don't even know what tomorrow's going to bring. What is your life? Look, you're a mist that appears for a moment and then it vanishes. Like, thank you for your contribution, but you're not going to save the world. I think that's a beautiful thing, right? Instead, what you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and we will do this or we will do that, And then he goes on to say, as it is, you're pretty arrogant to think that you're going to do any more than that, right? And all such boasting is evil. And so what I would say this is, I think that one of the ways that we can get our mind and ourselves out of the rut of being overwhelmed is just to realize, look, we have to actually, and this is going to sound a little trite and it's going to sound a little bit too obvious, but to get yourself out of that overwhelmed cycle, I truly believe that you need to actually organize. Because you'll always have problems to be dealing with. You'll always have things to manage. You're always in a paradox, and a paradox, and a paradox, and a paradox, right? So this idea is you're overwhelmed. There's so much to do and so many things to think about. You start in a disorganized fashion. And if you do that, you put out this effort, and then you put out this effort that doesn't get any real results because you don't have a system. Back to this again, right? And then you panic, right? And then you have inactivity because you're all panicked and freaking out and you're so disorganized, right? And then the growing workload, right? Nothing stops because you stopped. And then you're even that much more disorganized. And so my wife is so good at this. She's actually a genius at this in keeping herself from not being overwhelmed. And this is a very practical pastoral moment for you. She does this. She makes a list. She actually makes a list. And I know some of you are like, I would never do that. Well, that's fine. But she makes a list in order to get her problems to line up for her, because this is just a competency and a tool that you have to begin to live with. You have to actually begin to live in a disorganized world, and you have to start organizing these things and doing some things like this. And so my wife, she says she actually has 3 lists, which is even more complicated. I can't even organize 3 lists. But she says she has a to-do list, she has a doing list, and then she has a done list, right? And she says, I have to have those lists because I know myself, but it's also just for myself, my health and my sanity. It makes me a whole lot healthier and a whole lot happier if I know that I'm actually getting some things lined up, and I'm actually, it makes me feel way less overwhelmed. Jesse's really good at this too. He's super good at organizing, and he is always, I remember when we first started, especially when we first started, man, there's so much to do as a pastor. It's like, I got to communicate with these people and email these people, and I think I'm letting you down over here, and I don't know exactly how to do, and then my preaching is somehow taking a backseat to my leadership, and so now I've got to do a bunch of leadership stuff, and totally overwhelmed. And I remember him going, dude, you need a capturing device. I was like, what? And I just needed a device. I needed somewhere I could actually keep track of all of my problems and get them to line up. And so I just have a very simple way of doing that. I have in my notepad I used to have so many notepads and then I'd lose them all. I don't know if you guys ever do that. You just write it down. Just because you wrote it down, you think you remembered it. No, you actually have to have a capturing device that you return to all the time. And mine's very simple. It's just a list in my Apple notepad that says, get your act together, Chris. And every time now I know, like, I need to put that in there because I need to get that done. And I need to get that done, and I need to be thinking about that. And I just look over that list quite a bit. I have my calendar too. We have a church calendar. We have those kinds of things. But one of the biggest ways to get out of that rut is to do something to organize your life, because you're never going to have a life. There's never going to be a world where you're not going to need that, because you're in paradox after paradox after paradox. And so let's get out of that cycle. And just, you only have to organize a few things to start feeling the weight of that lift, right? So here's the third one, the last one I want to help you guys with today that I thought was really, really important. It's a little bit, I think it's a little lighter hearted one, but it can get you stuck in a pretty good sized rut. It's the escape hobby cycle that can lead to an addiction, but it's an escape hobby cycle. And so what we're finding is that there's no such thing really as a midlife crisis now. It's much more of like a quarter or an eighth life crisis. Like, you're having more than one midlife crisis. And what happens is, so guys do this stuff. I guess I could say, their midlife crises look a little bit more like, they get super into biking or whatever. They get super into home brewing or fishing or gaming or lifting or something that, something they can win at, right? And Charity, I was talking to her about, I was like, what do women do, that kind of they escape into to try to make it, mitigate some of the emotions that they're feeling, that makes them feel better so they can escape into. And she's like, they usually do stuff that, how they sort of look, they'll really concentrate on their figure. They'll concentrate on, I don't know. I don't even want to get into this right now. I should have her actually talk about this, but yeah, maybe you should scrap this, Jay. I have no idea. Is this still on? But here's what I want to say is that escapism, what it does, and a hobby can actually allow you to step away from your emotions when you're feeling really overwhelmed, right? And you can come back to that problem with a fresh mind. So this is a key competency that you have to actually engage in your life. This is a tool that you really need. And at 47 years old, I mean, many of you know that I do this and I putz quite a bit. I have to putz. Like, so putzing is that idea of like I go and I sew, or I go and I ride my bike, or I do something, I go fishing or something like that. And so you shouldn't think of escapism as good or bad. It's just a tool, right? But it can actually turn into a very negative thing. And here's how. What the escapism cycle does is it takes a hobby, and then what the hobby does is it sort of excuses you from what you should really be paying attention on or attention to, because you're winning at this thing, right? You're like, whether that's lifting or making something or, or catching as many fish, like you're winning. And so what happens is it excuses you not to work, because you're actually, it's really satisfying to be able to do that, to like, produce or whatever it might be. And so what happens is then you make more time for this hobby. And so then what do you get? You get more hobby from it, right? And you become less interested in what, actual work, or you less interested in things that you actually should prioritize. And so what you end up with is sort of a hobby life, and a hobby mentality. And what happens is that you end up at the end of that thing going, wait a minute, like, doesn't life have more to this than that? Here's another way that this cycle works to keep you in a really ineffective, unproductive life cycle is a lot of times a guy. So, and I don't know if this is true for women, but I know it's true for guys, and I think it's true for women. They'll go like, hey man, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go snow machining, or I'm going to go out and I'm going to go fishing, or I'm going to go out and I'm going to go do this thing. And then your wife will be like, oh, okay. And she gets a little bit like, I don't know if that, like, okay, go ahead. And some wives are like really cool about it for a while. And then you go and you do it again. You're like, hey, I want to go do this. Like, I need to go fishing or whatever. It's like, hey, didn't you go fishing last week? Or, why do you always? And so what happens in that is like you start to do your hobby, and you start to actually, you start to escape so much because it's satisfying and it's easy. And then what happens is then you come back and your wife is like, dude, I think you actually like this hobby more than you like me. And then you guys start fighting, and you're like, you know what? No, it's not, and it's like, and you're trying to justify yourself. And so pretty soon you have this antagonistic thing going on at home. And then you're like, you know what I want to do? I want to go fishing. And so you end up in this huge cycle where you haven't really learned how to actually prioritize what is really important. And you're not realizing like this thing is actually threatening the good results of the rest of my life, like my marriage or maybe my work ethic or my job. And so those escape hobby cycle can really turn into an addiction cycle, and it can keep you in a huge rut. And so what I really wanted to just try to do today is go, you know what? Let's not make laziness and ineffectiveness, right? And inactivity the thing that we carry out of quarantine. What I want us to do today is just go, you know what? I think there's some really, really, really practical things that are against us right now that we can actually sort of gear up for, and we can remind ourselves of, so that we don't get stuck in some patterns of things that are really going to work against us in quarantine. And again, I don't think our biggest threat is necessarily economic or necessarily anything other than maybe some of the really bad habits that we can produce during this time. And so I don't know if you're noticing that. Hopefully I'm catching you on the front side of some of these things where you're like, I don't know why I don't, I feel kind of lazy, but I don't. And so this is my prayer for you, man. It's my prayer for myself. I'm totally preaching to myself. Somebody say amen in the chat box right now, because I don't want to get stuck in these vicious cycles of inactivity and atrophying my self-discipline and my self-denial. And I really do want to walk into this new world with power and with grace and with a sound mind. And I'll kind of leave you with this thought from Proverbs. I love this. It says, the soul of the sluggard craves and gets nothing. So there's this like person who's like, I want, I really want to do this, right? But they're sluggish, right? There's no activity there. They don't know what to do, and they don't know how to do it, and they feel like they're stuck and everything. And so they keep craving, but they get nothing. But it says this, I love this, but the soul of the diligent is richly supplied. And so here's the three big ideas that I just want to keep in play right now, just for you, for me, is, if you feel like this world is passing you by, there's things that you can do, right? You can put some tools in play. You can get some competencies. You can get smarter, right? You can do that. You can actually learn what you need to learn, and you can actually become who you need to become. I think the other big idea is, in this world, we know that we're going to be going from one paradox to another paradox. Jesus says it. Self-experience says it. It's very self-evidencing. And so what we can do is we can actually go, you know what? I'm going to get these problems to line up in front of me. There's some things I need to organize, and then I just need to be tenacious in those things in order to do those things, in order to actually keep from feeling overwhelmed all the time. You can do it. You can do these things. And then last but not least, the idea is to prioritize. We've got to actually have escape. We've got to have hobbies, but they have to be in the right priority. And quarantine right now is trying to get us stuck, and we are not going to get stuck. And so I just feel like that in my mind is a very practical, very very helpful just way to sort of look at what's going on in your life right now, and the way that you're feeling about yourself, and the way you're feeling about the future. And here's the thing that you have to understand, is that we do have everything that we need for life and godliness. We walk into the future with the Spirit of God in us, with the wisdom of God in us, with the priorities of God in us. We have God's heart, which means we prioritize the right things. We have the wisdom of God, which means that He'll show us what to organize all the time. We actually have all of the tools of God in the Word of God to actually keep us competent spiritually, to keep us understanding ourselves and understanding the world that we live in. And so, again, this is where our faith is so beautiful, and we can't do it without it. This is where we actually have that secret advantage, man. We have that Holy Spirit advantage in each and every one of us. By faith, we know these things, and therefore we can rejoice. And we can also be very honest with the inconsistencies that are in our life. We can say, you know what, I'm honest enough, and I love God enough, and I love the people around me enough because Jesus is in me, that I can actually just admit, I feel like I'm being lazy right now. And you know what? God will meet you right in that spot, and He'll send a message like this to you, and He'll begin to heal your heart and begin to change your life. And so I just want to say this. If you are feeling overwhelmed, and you're feeling like, you know what, I need to add these things. Maybe you're feeling disorganized today. Maybe you're feeling like, you know what, I prioritized the wrong things. We want to pray for you. We can't connect with, I can't see you right now, but you can see me. But right now, if you want to go, we're putting it in the chat right now. We're putting the Zoom room link, and we want to meet you there. Someone's going to be there in that room right now, just to pray for you, and believe God with you for just some release and some relief and some Holy Spirit stirring and beauty and breakthrough for you. So we want to meet you in that place. Please do that. Also, you can always leave comments in the comment section. We want to continue to connect with you and love you, and we are excited about getting together again. But until then, we're gonna make these opportunities possible to see each other and connect with each other. I do want to try this, if you guys want to try this with me. 2 on 2, 1, 2. You guys do it? Should we try one more time? 2 on 2, 1, 2. Does that feel? That feels different. But anyway, hey man, spring is in the air. God doesn't want us to be stuck in a rut. One of our biggest threats is just falling into these lazy ruts. And God is like, nope. I'm going to give you some wisdom. I'm going to give you some tools. I'm going to give you some competencies. I'm going to remind you what your priorities are. And then after this, we want to pray for you. So meet us in the Zoom room. We love you guys. This is a benediction. It's not a prayer. It is just simply a blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and cause you to break free from any laziness or any dark cycle that's going to hold you back from what God has for you. Go in peace. Serve the Lord with joy. Together we say, thanks be to God. Amen.